You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. Glad to have you aboard. And during our first half hour today, we'll focus on the winter wheat crop in Kansas. First, taking on just where we stand with our winter wheat, given that beneficial rains did occur this past week around the state, and there's more rain in the forecast. Across the way once again is Romulo Lollato, wheat production specialist with K-State Research and Extension. Now, to set the table here, though, Romulo, prior to last week, the wheat was in fairly tough shape in a lot of places around Kansas.
Definitely, Eric. Prior to these last week rains, we're actually seeing throughout the state from south-central Kansas through southwest Kansas on the trips that we were making, really the wheat starting to lose some of the older leaves, and even in some cases, southwest Kansas, some of the older tillers as well, because of the dry conditions. If we look back at the growing season this far, we actually hadn't had significant moisture since October, when in parts of the state we got quite a bit of precipitation. Actually, back in October, the first week of October, as much as 7 inches or so, depending where we were. But really, since then, the crop hasn't really seen measurable precipitation for the majority of the wheat growing region of the state. So the situation was that in many different places that we were visiting, there was decent subsoil moisture, so 8 inches below ground or so, we could see that the moisture was available. However, the topsoil was really dry. All these months since October without any measurable precipitation really dried the topsoil. So we were having a mismatch of where the roots were as compared to where the moisture was. Because we planted late. For the majority of the state, we were on the late side of planting, and we had below average temperatures fall and winter there, so the crop didn't develop as much. So there was a mismatch. The crown roots were maybe 1 inch long in development, in many cases way less than that, and the moisture was about 7 or 8 inches down. So it really makes you wonder, is this a crop that will reach that moisture? It has some moisture in the top, on the subsoil, but will it reach it? So that was the situation before these rains. Several parts of the state starting to slaughter off some of those older leaves and tillers, and that mismatch between where the root was and the moisture. Luckily, it was kind of below average temperatures as well, so the combination of the drought with below average temperatures was kind of keeping the crop in check, not really allowing the crop to grow as it would be normal for this time of the year.
Then rains came, and how much did they help the crop is the question at hand here. And it depends on the amount of rain, but there was at least some soaking up to some extent, that topsoil, in the better part of Kansas.
Definitely. So last week the rain came, and it really ranged for less than 1/4 of an inch, kind of southwest Kansas, kind of south of Tribune. Producers were reporting that the rain was just enough to maybe settle the dust, so not really beneficial to the crop on that part of the state as much as we would like. It's always good to have any kind of moisture, but we would like some more over there. And there were regions of the state where we got as much as over 2 inches of precipitation, such as Reno County, for example, Hutchinson, or even Great Bend, for example. We had close to 2 inches of precipitation. So definitely really helpful. The crop was in desperate need of that moisture. That moisture will allow not only the roots to get back and developing and hopefully reach that subsoil moisture, but also will make sure that the nitrogen that have already been applied goes into the root zone and allows the crop to absorb that nitrogen as well. So after the rain, what we're seeing, especially in these regions where it got enough precipitation to really help the crop, such as Hutchinson, is that the crop is really taking on spring development. We were measuring first hollow stem on a very consistent basis before, and we were not seeing a lot of development. But now after the rains, we're seeing that some of those early varieties, they have already reached first hollow stem, and some of the late ones, they are developing as well. Very soon, they will be there as well. How does this compare to the last 2 years since we started measuring first hollow stem in the state? By March 15th, all varieties had reached first hollow stem the last 2 years. Now we are already March 27th, and the early ones have reached, the late ones still have not. So we are slightly delayed in development as compared to previous years because of a combination of late planting and drought and cooler conditions. But definitely the crop is taking on spring development, and that comes with some possible management adjustments that we need to make.
Which we'll talk about right here. But could it be said that this was a crop-saving rain here a week and a half ago in some parts of Kansas?
Definitely, definitely. I have heard my fellow K-Stater Lucas Hagg refer to it as a multi-million-dollar rain, and I completely agree with him there. I think it really saved the crop in many parts of the state. We still need definitely more rain, especially towards southwest Kansas. The crop still desperately needs some rain down there in that part of the state. But definitely for central, north central, south central Kansas, and even parts of northwest Kansas, I think that rain is really going to be very helpful and maybe helping the crop get back on track.
So, as you said, management now from here forward. What things come to mind immediately here?
So we were referring to the first hollow stem up to now. Although that applies more directly to producers who are grazing their crop and intending to take it for yield, that also applies to our other growers that are grain-only growers. So with that first hollow stem, what we're meaning is that it is time to remove the cattle from the wheat pasture. If you were grazing and intending to take that crop for yield, it is time to take the cattle out so you're not hurting your yield potential. Again, just as a reminder, if you're grazing past first hollow stem, for every day that you're grazing past that stage, you're probably losing 1 to 5% of that yield potential. So really a very steep decrease in grain yield for every day grazed past first hollow stem. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. If you're grazing it, intending to take for yield, check for first hollow stem in an ungrazed area of each individual field, but by this time you definitely should take the cattle out of the pasture. Second management practice that we need to talk about, nitrogen management. I know that many producers were waiting until a decent chance of rain. And
to the very last minute, actually.
Definitely. That's what we were recommending as well. So if we don't have a good rain chance in the forecast, wait until you have a good rain chance so you're not losing that nitrogen. Now, if you haven't yet applied your nitrogen, there is another rain chance this week for the majority of the state. Hopefully that rain is going to come as well. But especially for the folks out west, if you haven't applied nitrogen yet, definitely time to be thinking about getting it done before this next rain chance of Thursday. So really need to be working with, okay, what's the estimate yield potential that you have, right? And there's still some time to get some recovery on that yield potential if the nitrogen is out there in these next few days. And finally, another management practice that we can talk about would be split fungicide applications. Probably not going to get into detail on that right now, as Eric will talk about it in the second.
The weather will be staying cool, it appears, for a while, so that's going to tighten the reins on that wheat growth, isn't it?
Yes, so we do have, looking at the forecast here, so we have this rain chance for Thursday that we were talking about, but also there's a cold weather forecast for now, late March, early April. Actually, towards the weekend, we have temperature forecast there for as cold as 23 degrees Fahrenheit.
A hard freeze then.
Pretty hard freeze out in parts of western Kansas. Now, if we think of how cold can the crop withstand at this stage, and considering that developing head is moving above the surface already so that we're reaching that jointing stage, the crop can still withstand temperatures of about 23, 24 degrees Fahrenheit pretty well. I mean, I wouldn't expect too much of cold damage, even if we're as further along as jointing, which I wouldn't expect a large portion of the state to be at, just because of how late the crop is in general. Mm-hmm. So I think despite the pretty cold temperatures that we have forecasted, I think this delayed crop development will actually help us a little bit here withstanding these cold temperatures, because this is pretty much the temperatures that are forecasted are around the lower limits of what the crop can handle at a more developed stage than it is now. So although cold temperatures are forecasted, I think the crop should handle it pretty well if temperatures don't get too much colder than what they are forecasted.
Another silver lining of the cold winter and the cool temperatures we've had to date. And you constantly keep track of what's happening with the winter wheat crop, and will do so for the coming weeks. The first hollow stem update will continue on the E-Update series out of agronomy. That's your plan?
Definitely. So we're keeping measuring until all the 28 varieties that we're measuring are past the first hollow stem. So I foresee that that's going to happen within the next 10 days or so, but we'll keep measuring until all of them are passed. And we're also constantly updating on wheat crop conditions. It might be on disease incidence, what we're seeing towards the south of us. It might just be general management practices, what we should be doing, or just general crop updates. So if you are looking for more information and you are on social media, make sure and follow me on Twitter at KSU Wheat, or on Facebook as well at KSU Wheat. And make sure that you subscribe to the agronomy e-updates through K-State, which we send them on a weekly basis.
Romulo, we appreciate you bringing us up to date on what's going on with our winter wheat crop, and we will have you back again soon for further information. Appreciate your time right here.
Thank you, Eric.
He is Romulo Lollato, Wheat Production Specialist, K-State Research and Extension. And you're listening to Agriculture Today. As noted, we will visit after the break about the prospect of a split fungicide application to winter wheat at this point of the growing season. That's next here on the K-State Radio Network.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Agriculture Today is back now on the K-State Radio Network, and with that conversation featuring wheat disease specialist Eric D. Wolf of K-State Research and Extension. As noted earlier, we've brought him by to take a closer look at the prospect of a split fungicide application to winter wheat. Before we get into why a producer might give this consideration, Eric, just the latest word on diseases in the wheat crop. The up to recent dry weather has tempered the disease pressure some, has it not?
I think so. And one of the things that's from a local perspective, dry conditions have dominated for months, and that's likely going to suppress some of the disease development that may have gotten off to an early start. And in some years, I think has largely been absent in this year with kind of delays in planting and small, thin stands in many areas of the state, coupled with continued dry conditions, and slows the development of disease. But on a bigger perspective, it's not just here in Kansas, but also in many parts of the southern plains as well, Texas and Oklahoma. If you remember, January, February, and parts of early March were extremely dry for them also. Mm-hmm. And that often suppresses some of the rust diseases that overwinter in those southern plains and then migrate into our areas on storm systems.
So the devil's advocate question would be, does that preclude then the need for fungicide use on this winter wheat stand?
Well, not necessarily. I think we need to keep an open mind here of what's going on. We've been in similar situations the last couple of years where we've seen dry conditions locally, at least in February and March, and then the rains start to come in April and keep coming through May, and we've had some serious problems with stripe rust. So let's keep our eyes open here, and let's not close the door yet on some of the disease risk potential for this year. Make sure that we don't get any surprises down the road.
Normally, those applications would go on around the flag leaf stage or in that general vicinity. But there is this idea of splitting the application and actually putting on a fungicide right around now in this time. What would be the rationale for doing so?
Well, there are a couple strategies. You mentioned the historically research has shown from K-State and really throughout the world that probably the best time to apply a single fungicide application is going to be at that flag leaf emergence through heading stages of growth, because those flag leaves, the upper leaves, are so important to maintaining the yield potential of the crop. So protecting that leaf is of utmost importance. But in recent years, we've seen a real push coming out of some higher intensive wheat management philosophies where we'll split that application, we'll couple that second application with an earlier application, sometimes applied as early as spring green up and maybe into the jointing stages of growth, and trying to get a little bit extra out of that yield potential. And one of the main advantages of that early application is that it's often a low-cost type of application, as people are trying to combine it with application costs they're already making for a herbicide application or fertility applications, and thus the green up time type of applications where they combine it with herbicides or fertility. And try and just have if you're going with a low labeled rate, it would just be a fairly low fungicide input cost there.
The value of such an application would have a lot to do with the likely disease presence. There are 2 or 3 particular pathogens where that application at green up might help a producer get the jump on those, right?
Yeah, there's lots of different ways of looking at that. And, we've done a lot of research at K-State looking at that type of scenario, and those very early applications around green up in the absence of disease often don't translate into very much yield response. But where we do see a response to that is maybe a little bit later applications closer to the jointing stages of growth, when you have a disease that's getting started, such as tan spot, the septoria leaf blotch, or powdery mildew. And all of those survive locally right there in the field. So your previous rotation and residue management tillage practices play a big role into the local pathogen population and the risk of you having those diseases. So in those higher risk situations, if you know you have a variety that's, say, susceptible to tan spot or powdery mildew, you're in a wheat-on-wheat, no-till production system, those are often places where we see that little extra benefit from those early fungicide applications to keep those diseases from getting a foothold in the field.
Well, then, does one want to be more selective about the fungicide they would choose for these early applications?
Well, that's the other avenue that you could take, as we mentioned, using a little lower rate. And in some ways, using a lower rate of a fungicide, like any pesticide, plays right into the hands of, in this case, fungicide resistance, or like we've seen with so many weed populations and herbicides, unfortunately, that case of herbicide resistance. But the same kind of biological principles are going on with these fungicide applications. So going in with a low rate or the same product time and time again can elevate the risk of us having fungicide resistance build there. So another philosophy or another approach here is to use just a low-cost, often generic fungicide application, but use it at the full labeled rate to try and make sure that you're getting the maximum benefit, but still trying to maintain the philosophy of keeping the cost down and the main benefit of those early fungicide applications.
And then follow up later with a more robust fungicide choice?
Well, potentially. I think some of those generic fungicides, are particularly for rust control, are still fairly robust fungicide treatments. But the idea is that, yes, you would definitely need a second fungicide application. Just the early one alone is not going to carry you through all the way through the growing season. So keep in mind that the only those leaves that are out at the time of application will have the benefit of the fungicide. So if you're applying the fungicide at green up or at jointing, you've got a lot of leaves yet to come, and they will have no protection. So if rust does reemerge around the heading stages of growth, like it often does, that early fungicide wouldn't suppress those diseases any longer.
As you've alluded as well, one has to pay particular attention to label restrictions with an early application, as you would with a normally timed one.
I think so. So in addition to this fungicide choice here, that's making a decision early to go with, say, a generic such as the tebuconazole products that have been some of the low-cost options now. So that was a product, active ingredient that was originally developed by Bayer Crop Science and marketed under the name Folicure for a number of years. But now there's a lot of competition within the generic market for those tebuconazole type of products. So low-cost option there, but you're only allowed 4 ounces of that product per year, if I understand the labeling, the current labeling of that. And if we said a moment ago, we're going to go with that full labeled rate of 4 ounces at the jointing stages of growth, then we're closing the door to some options later. So we now can't come back in with the same low-cost fungicide of that same molecule or active ingredient at the heading stages of growth when stripe rust might be threatening. So the decisions you make now, or what's important here, the decisions you make now do, according to labels, sometimes have implications down the road. And we just want to caution people, think this through a little bit. Is this really the time you want to use that resource and that particular product according to the labels that you've got.
Well, K-State has accumulated great information on fungicide performance and selection, and the efficacy ratings would be helpful here for one thing.
Absolutely. So a lot of fungicides have a very good to excellent ratings on most of the foliar diseases. So I think the good news is a lot of growers have a lot of great tools, a lot of great options in the toolbox that they can use. And we do combine all our data with data from throughout the country. Wheat pathologists around the country pool our resources every year and then try and come up with a general consensus of how well these products stack up head-to-head in different comparisons from all over the country. And those results are summarized in each state. Ours is put out in a publication that comes out about this time every year. I think the 2017 version is the current one, but we hope to have a 2018 version out in the next couple weeks here.
So keep an eye out for that. But for the here and now, you can turn to the Wheat Variety Disease and Insect Ratings 2017 for reference. But moreover, the foliar fungicide efficacy ratings for wheat disease management is out there as well. Both are extension publications and both available through your local extension office or online from the K-State Plant Pathology website. Lastly, the prospect for diseases in this winter wheat crop are just as likely as any other, despite the dry weather, right, Eric?
Well, I think it's definitely something that we're going to want to keep an eye on here, that we have heard of a few localized outbreaks in Texas. I think, as we mentioned at the outset of the program, that the overall regional disease pressure or disease levels appears to be lower because of the dry conditions. But there's enough there that given the right environment, the right weather conditions, we could see a very rapid increase of rust to our south and or movement locally here as well. So let's keep our eyes open here, make sure we don't get any surprises, and use the management inputs and economic resources with the narrow wheat profit margins here. Let's make sure we make some good decisions about how to use those resources.
Good comments right there. Eric, thanks for coming over, as always.
You're welcome.
Wheat disease specialist with K-State Research and Extension, Eric D. Wolf. There is a comprehensive article on this very topic that you might want to have a look at as well, producers, entitled Split Fungicide Treatments on Wheat. Should producers consider an early application? That is part of the Agronomy E-Update newsletter series. It was posted this past Friday, March the 23rd. You can access that at agronomy.ksu.edu. And you are tuned to Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen. This is our state, Kansas.
I wonder if they take hard, physical work, energy as a legacy.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
They no longer ask just for a donation. No, they now suggest to be remembered in my will or estate plan. It also mentions that I can remain anonymous. I like that. No one needs to know what I do or have done. The small card with the invitation was enclosed with a bulletin. Wildlife Legacy, stressing gardens in support of wildlife. Turn your garden into a certified wildlife habitat. But whatever I do does not need to be certified. It's my doing, and that's enough. No certification needed. What I do understand is that certification will give it some quality control. That I can agree with. However, there too, I don't need help. As the hint at creating the right habitat with the garden. I wonder if they take hard physical work and energy as a legacy. I quote a paragraph taken from the bulletin. Every habitat garden is a step toward replenishing resources for wildlife locally and along migratory corridors. You will be amazed at the short time it takes for your garden to be filled with life, activity, and color. Then there are tips to get started. First tip, food. Plant shrubs that flower and produce berries. Second tip, put out a bird bath. It does not need to be large. However, the setting of a bird bath can be more or less interesting. I use a black feeder trough. It holds 2 buckets of water. It's set on the ground near the feeder, surrounded by vinca minor, a ground cover that creates a blue carpet in spring and neat, glossy leaves the rest of the season. I placed it on the ground so squirrels and deer can drink from it as well. I put a heater in it so it wouldn't freeze. I placed a large rock in a container to facilitate the birds and butterflies, as well as other insects. Tip 3. Cover. Shrubs, wildflowers, garden, rock walls, and evergreens all help to provide cover. Nesting boxes for birds, milkweed for caterpillars, or ponds for frogs make a great place to raise young. Tip 5. Sustainability. Put away the chemicals. Natural gardens are better for you and for wildlife. Tip 6. Certify your sustainable habitat garden. I find that childish. So, like I said, forget about that. But making your yard attractive to the different forms of wildlife, I take very seriously. And I can tell you that it does take an investment in your time and energy, as well as available money to buy plants. In 1977, I wrote the extension publication Naturalistic Landscaping. I wonder if it is still available today. Maybe your county agent has a reprint. It shows a house landscape plan which reminds me of the hill here at home, where I have incorporated the ideas and thoughts on how to attract and observe the wildlife which belongs here. Which reminds me that the turkey vultures are back. They took to the rings from the tree close to the old horse barn. That is a good sign. It was only last year they used the barn as a safe nest to lay 2 eggs. They hatched both eggs, and we watched the chicks grow and take to their wing as the summer slowly slipped by. The same with all the young songbirds hanging around the feeders. You know, if a publication reflects a personality, then this publication, Naturalistic Landscaping, reflects who I am, at least part of me. On the side of the first page, I quote Sidney Smith, who once wrote, "I went to stay at a very grand and beautiful place in the country, where the grounds are said to be laid out with consummate taste. For the first 3 or 4 days, I was enchanted. It seemed much better than nature, that I began to wish the earth had been laid out according to the latest principles of improvement. In 3 days' time, I was tired to death. A thistle, a heap of dead bushes, anything that wore the appearance of accident and want of intention was quite a relief. I used to escape from the made grounds and walk upon the adjacent Goose Common, where the cart ruts, gravel pits, bumps, coarse, ungentlemanlike grass, and all the varieties produced by neglect were 1,000 times more gratifying." These are the words of Sidney Smith, a wise man. I would like that all places like nursing homes, retirement communities, city parks, school grounds, and others invest in the development of large enough habitats for wildlife, but especially in such a way that the older or challenged people can watch and enjoy, that it may touch their sensory perception. Remember, if we don't die, we will get old. The time and energy it takes to create such places may very well mean that we at ripe old age sense the joy of a natural environment. And mind you, we need not to be old to enjoy. Here on the hill, all is well. Soon, I'll be more outside, getting things done. In the meantime, snakes are snaking, pack rats are packing, and the birds are birding.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas. And with that, our Wednesday edition comes to a close. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.